What is it about Pope Francis? People are really taking account of him. He's attracting attention in all sorts of places. After all, Margaret used Pope Francis as the intro into her sermon last week. All around the place we are seeing him getting media attention and having people say, this man has got something for us. It's not just Catholics. It's not even just Christians. People who are looking to him as a voice of common sense from what is perhaps, for many, a very surprising source. Despite his continuing conservatism in key areas such as the role of women and aspects of sexuality, Pope Francis is seen as a leader, a clear voice on current issues. Yet little that he says is new. His challenge on climate change in the encyclical Laudato Si that we've heard about a couple of times here has been issued by many others for some time. His call to give hospitality to refugees from Africa and Syria echoes many other voices. His approach to poverty and the impact of wealth inequality is widely discussed in the UN, its New Development Goals, in economic circles. So why is he listened to when others have not been? I suggest that's because he is a symbolic figure in a symbolic position. When the Pope speaks, he is heard as speaking on behalf of something much bigger than himself. He is just one individual man, but he represents and points towards things beyond himself. Even in relation to huge, seemingly impossible issues, one symbolic individual can focus attention, shift the ground, revise our worldview, and keep on doing that beyond their lifetime. Think Nelson Mandela, Kate Shepherd, Martin Luther King. A while ago, there was a lot of talk in New Zealand about doing something in regard to the refugees, about increasing the numbers that we might take into this country, but with little effect. Then we saw the pictures of the small body of Syrian boy Aylan washed up on a Turkish beach. That one image, the plight of that one small boy, resulted in almost immediate government action as the result of the noise made in protest. Symbolism around an individual or a single image like that of that small boy can make a difference, can raise the pressure, can help people change their minds and governments change their policy. It's easier for us to imagine the significance of a difficult and damaging situation when we see it focused on one individual than we can from a set of huge statistical numbers. One matters. If we look at Jesus' parables, they almost always tell the story of one person, or at least focus on one person. Jesus recognises that a point about compassion, for example, is best expressed in relation to a single individual, as in the story we call the Good Samaritan. That's not a story simply about the individuals that are talked about. It's a challenge to Jesus' hearers to shift their ideas, a challenge to all of us to shake off our prejudices, to act compassion towards all around us. And of course, in that case, it's a challenge to religious leaders too, to change ingrained rules and priorities, and that often underlies the parables of Jesus. That parable is focused on one symbolic figure, but it's not about that one individual. In this morning's Gospel, we have Jesus focusing on communal wealth issues in response to one good man. Then that story of Jesus, that parable, has been expanded, at least in part, by the Gospel writer, who I think probably gets the point of the original parable wrong, as so often happens in the New Testament, where the expansions of the parable pick up something which is not the intention of Jesus in his original story. Here the Gospel writer goes on commenting on how hard it is for a rich person to live a fulfilled life. Harder even for a camel to get through the eye of a needle. It could well be that that last bit actually was said by Jesus, unlike, I think, most of the rest of it, and unlike many scholars today would say. Biblical scholars these days are increasingly certain that Jesus was a wisdom preacher rather than a prophet, as we have for a long time thought of him. They would now be saying that Jesus spoke in parables, short little sayings with a pithy single point about them, focused on one person, and short little sayings, which is what wisdom preachers did. If you know the wonderful movie The Life of Brian, which probably presents biblical scholarship from the 1970s as well as any other book or way of doing so, in the way it looks at the figures in their context and how they speak. There's this wonderful piece where Brian, hiding from the Romans, falls off the stand he's hiding on into a bunch of wisdom preachers who are all spouting incomprehensible short phrases. And he joins them. And he says things like, "Consider the lilies." And people don't know what on earth he's talking about. That's actually probably a very good presentation of the kind of preaching that Jesus did. Short, pithy statements that are not easy for us to understand, packed with insight, but making you think to get the point. All aimed at shifting people's perceptions, shifting the ideas people have of life that are ingrained and always seem to be common sense, shifting the priorities for life. Little sayings like, "Do not be anxious about life. Consider the lilies. How happy are you who are poor? Poor, happy. Many who are last shall be first." And it's clear that Jesus also, in doing this, like other wisdom preachers, uses humour, puts together things that we don't usually see together, or puts them together in a new way to make us think. The camel and the eye of the needle, compared with a rich person wanting a fulfilled life. A good man needing to give away his wealth rather than following all the standard commandments. They're jokes. They're jokes used to provoke people to think and helping the hearers to remember what was said. And in these words today, in the parable today, Jesus reflects a core biblical theme. Economic justice is crucially important. How we deal with wealth and poverty is central to biblical ethics. Read the First Testament and see how that tracks all the way through. Many of us have heard stories or even seen lots of pictures of individuals who suffer the effects of poverty, yet somehow those have not motivated us to action around the core issues of money, wealth, economics. Perhaps that's because all of us are entwined with money issues, whether we're wealthy or not. It's very personal for us. Yet it's important to recognise that this is not about me. Symbolic stories point to something more than any individual. Jesus' story about that rich man is not telling us individually to give our money away. That's not how Jesus' stories work. They're designed rather to make us think, to review and revise our priorities, to shift our view away from ourselves and to the larger picture of community, of society, of the world in which we're a part. In these stories, Jesus is pointing up the impossibility of fulfilled lives for and within communities when some are very rich and others struggle. Wealth inequality, usually defined as the gap between the top 20% in a society and the lowest 20%, and the impact of that inequality on persons and societies is currently a central concern for economic theorists. The form we have it today is seen to be embedded in capitalism, and that's pushing for a reshaping of the capitalist structure and the theories that lie behind it. A topic possibly for our Social Justice Committee to pick up, or maybe a conversation for this community on some occasion. What's more, there is strong statistical evidence that the more unequal a society is, the lower will be its life expectancy, the higher its crime levels, the poorer the health of its population. And that's so whether the country itself is poor or wealthy, and the impacts affect in some way all who are part of that community. So many of the things we blame on the way individuals live, or on poor performance by SIFs or the police, seem more likely to be an inevitable result of the imbalance of wealth. More significantly, perhaps, the wealth imbalance and the attitudes and policies that drive it also underlie those issues we noted at the beginning. The conditions of conflict that produce the refugees seeking a better life, the disastrous effects of international poverty, climate change and governmental inaction in making effective changes. One difference we as individuals can make is to live and speak the gospel story about that good man. If each of us and all of us together, building on the message of Jesus, recognise that specific rules of behaviour or particular items of faith are not as important for a good life as the way we approach money, that becomes a symbol of a different world. If each of us and all of us together, recognising the challenge Jesus makes to the doctrines and structures of faith and church, seek to ask questions of our Christian community about priorities that favour commandments over compassionate use of wealth, that moves from symbol to action. If each of us and all of us together, hearing Jesus' wisdom about the ultimate impossibility of a fulfilled life for a community while wealth inequalities exist, take courage to critique social and economic policies, that puts direct action at the heart of our life together.